Hello, and welcome to Melomaniax, the podcast where we take unbiased deep dives into the biggest musicians and bands of all time. I'm Ashton.
And I'm Dallas. Today we're going to be talking about some local legends for us South Carolinians, and that's Hootie and the Blowfish. But before we dive in, please don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on our socials. We're on Instagram and TikTok. And most importantly, please hit us with those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, although we do appreciate reviews on all platforms. We also have a Patreon that's officially live. We offer a single $5 per month tier. That's going to give you access to our private Discord, as well as a shout out on one of our episodes and the ability to vote on future episode topics like the one you're listening to right now.
So,
I love anytime I come across funny news articles or anything interesting that kind of like follows up on something we've talked about on the show. I always post it in the Discord. So that's one thing that I like to do with it.
I noticed that. And then you send me all kinds of memes about our topics a lot of times that are always pretty funny.
Did you see the Taylor Swift one?
I did.
It's her like on a big platform and it's and they overlaid the minions like where he's like, "Minions tonight, we blah blah blah." And when they all go, "Ah," it pans to the crowd and it like really looks like it matches up.
Yeah, I know. That's good.
It's actually kind of scary when you think about it that way, but it is also funny. Anyway, today we're talking about our local hometown heroes, Hootie and the Blowfish. Should we dive in?
I think so. So before, we always kind of open up with our familiarity with them. And yeah. I just kind of knew a couple of the hit singles. And I knew, obviously we both went to University of South Carolina. Me only for a year, but you graduated from there. And I remember one of the first things was like seeing all the different places from the cover of their first album. Like, oh, that's from the Hootie and the Blowfish album, and just like, it was kind of cool because they're just known on campus because that's where they were born.
Yeah. So if you're from,
not the individual members, sorry.
Yeah, true. If you're from South Carolina, particularly Columbia, which is the capital of South Carolina, and that's where the University of South Carolina is, the university. And like Ashton said, that's where we went. That's where Hootie comes from, and we're going to get into that today. So growing up, as soon as I picked up a guitar, everyone wants to, it's always your dad's friends and stuff are always like, "Oh, you should blah, blah, blah. Oh, you got to listen to Jimi Hendrix. You got to listen." And they just start bombarding you with all the music, which is great. That's how you learn a lot of stuff. But coming from Columbia, you'd always get people that were like, "You got to learn some Hootie, dude." Like they were like, had such a special place in the hearts of people from here. Because people, I think when they won, and they won in such a big way that we're going to talk about, I think people felt like that they also won, because South Carolina doesn't get a lot of heavy hitters from here. Can you name some? I can name maybe 4 or 5.
As far as successful
Hootie's the biggest.
Yeah.
Well, not even just successful music act, anybody.
Yeah, I read that it had a couple names in the book. I didn't mention it, but one that I didn't know is James Brown was born in South Carolina, but he doesn't really associate his music from here. It's associated.
I didn't know that one either. The few that I know are Edwin McCain, I think is from Greenville. You
that
remember
was
his
listed.
Song? Yep. Marcus King is from Greenville as well. He's a modern guy. He's killer. And he's absolutely blown up. Aziz Ansari is from Columbia.
That's right.
And,
I forgot.
Stephen Colbert is from South Carolina as well.
Nice.
There's a few others, but we don't really have that many people that go on to like be famous and successful. So whenever there is one, South Carolinians really, really get behind them, I think.
Yeah, and it definitely mentioned in the book that I read that specifically in this kind of area, a lot of people just really gravitate towards local bands for those kind of reasons, that like local bands become really big around here. Yeah, unfortunately,
it's only after you start winning in a pretty big way. Then people are all of a sudden like, "Oh, what?" And then it's like,
Hootie,
okay,
though.
where were you when we were struggling?
They were big before they ever were blown up. But
as pre-internet might have been very different, but
yeah, and it even mentions that it made an association with like nowadays it just takes a couple clicks to get your name out there, but back then you had to go town to town, pass out your cassette in person, play in front of people to build your following.
Yeah, for sure, a lot more grind, get in it and grind. But when I was told to learn, Hootie the Blowfish songs, I started learning Hootie the Blowfish songs. So I started, they're one of the bands I learned a lot of their songs early on guitar and stuff, which was good. They're not very difficult songs, so it was nice, like kind of beginner intermediate guitar for me. And that's how I kind of got introduced to them, and then always loved them. A handful of my favorite songs, pretty much all from the first album, which we'll talk about. But
yeah, so let's I'll go ahead and dive in. We're going the beginning today. We're going to be starting our story on the campus of the University of South Carolina in September of 1985, right in the midst of 80s. Just a fun time for everyone.
So this is about 30 years-ish, 26, before you and I were in the, running around the same stomping grounds.
Yeah, that's fun to think about. And so our story actually starts in the shower, of all places, where Darius Rucker was a sophomore at the university, and he thought he had the dorm hallway all to himself when he went to take a shower. Apparently, at the time he went in there, a lot of people had their second classes of the day. Because he was a sophomore, I think a lot of the freshmen and stuff had different schedules, but anyways, he thought he was basically alone, and he loved singing in the dorm showers because the acoustics were phenomenal, and Dallas and I can attest to that.
Yeah, we used to do a bunch of singing in those same bathrooms.
Yep, the exact same ones, dude. We'd just I remember when we got that big group together.
Sing Gregorian chant?
Yeah, that's what I was just about to say. We got like 4 or 5 people from the hallway and did the chant singing. That was incredible. Yep. Gosh, we got to go hop back in there somehow. We got to convince someone to let us up there, and we just want to record something.
That would actually be a cool idea.
I know, right? Anyways, so those same bathrooms, and so Darius was singing the song Honesty by Billy Joel, and he did I think he sang it through 3 times. He said he loved the bridge. Singing the bridge was a lot of fun for him. And he hopped out of the shower, toweled up, and was headed back to his room when a head poked out from one of the rooms and said, "Man, was that you singing?" And it was some freshman named Mark Bryan. And Darius responded, "Yeah, that was me." And Mark's face lit up and told him, "I play guitar." And so the two decided to sit down in Mark's room after Darius got dressed and basically played the "Do You Know This Song" game for hours on end. And they were just singing and playing the whole time, and even amassed a small crowd outside the room, on day one. Just people just hanging around oh, okay. Singing and guitar playing usually attracts ears.
I love that. Yeah. That happened to me not too long ago. We were on tour, and we stopped by Sweetwater in Indiana. Mm-hmm. And I might have told you this, but we found ukuleles on the wall, and one of them was the Paul Stanley Ibanez Iceman ukulele, which is this crazy metal guitar shape, but it was a ukulele. So we thought that was hilarious. So I picked that one up, and Daryl picked up another one, and we started playing "Sweet Child of Mine," and just as a joke. And pretty soon we had 20 people out with their phones and stuff.
Oh yeah, it's always so
it was
quick
really
with
funny.
That.
But getting back to this, Mark and Darius had made it a daily routine, started a daily routine of jamming together in the dorm room, which would almost always turn into a small party. So people from the hall would gather to listen and, more importantly, drink. So the two basically had an audience from day one. They played their first gig on October 12th, 1985 at a small bar called Pappy's. Not sure why I can't talk today. They played under the name The Wolf Brothers, because one of their friends introduced them as such. That's really funny when you just go on stage. It's like the Spider-Man thing, what's your name?
So the way this actually happened was they had a friend, the friend that introduced them. I can't remember what his name was, but his nickname was The Wolf. And so he introduced them and called them the Wolf Brothers, just straight up called them his name, named them after himself.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
Well, after the show, the duo decided they wanted to turn the duo into a full band. So the search began for a bass player and a drummer. And one of Mark's oldest friends, Dean Felber, happened to play bass and was also attending USC. He played in some bands in high school. He was in the high school orchestra as well as the jazz ensemble. Because of the overload of music, Dean was taking a break from music during his first semester of school. So when Mark asked him to join the group, he told him no quite a few times. I've been there. Where you want to get a really good musician friend of yours to join your band, and he's like, nah. It's like, oh man, we could change the world. Nah, don't wanna. Anyway, Dean recalls not saying no because he wasn't interested. He just wasn't interested in being in a cover band. If he was going to get back into music, he wanted to be creative. Can relate to that as well. But he was definitely attracted to the idea of actually having a good singer versus the bad singers he'd played with in high school. So finally, he agreed to join the band, but only temporarily until they could find someone to replace him. He's still waiting on that replacement today.
I'm sure he's okay with it by this point.
I think those royalty checks coming in are a little enticing.
I know,
right?
Their
original drummer, Brantley Smith, was actually a cello player in the University Symphony. We've been all over that side of the campus as well. He also was in the choir and was in multiple ensembles outside of that. So
yeah,
I'm not sure if at that time in the university, if the music school was where it was, but definitely spent a lot of time around that music school.
Yeah, I don't know where it was back then either. I know Darius was part of Carolina Alive, is what their chorus was. I don't know if it's still called that, or if they even still have that, but that's where he did his singing. And Brantley Smith was actually pretty prolific as a musician, singer, just all across the board. So they loved having him in the group. But now that they had their 4 members, a good amount for a band, they couldn't be called the Wolf Brothers any longer. So they needed a band name, especially since they had a gig coming up already. I feel like this is always the story, like gig coming up, then just last minute name the band.
This is Doobie Brothers.
Yep. Like, oh shit, we need a name.
Oh man. Yeah, just like whatever comes out,
Yep. And so there were 2 guys on campus that were like basically inseparable, just 2 good friends. And Darius had nicknamed them Hootie and the Blowfish. Their actual names were Irvin Harris and Donald Feaster. And I think it's Feaster, maybe it's Fester with an A that's silent. But anyways, when the band was they were sitting around at one of the choir parties. The director of Carolina Alive actually was throwing it. And Irvin and Donald walk in the room and Darius says, "Hey, it's Hootie and the Blowfish." And like literally at that moment, it was just like the light bulb went off and they were like, "Oh yeah, this is the band name." Like just decided on the spot. And apparently the other names they came up with were so bad, which is funny because Hootie and the Blowfish is a pretty bad name. And it comes up a lot with recording companies saying no to it. Yeah.
Not a good name. Legendary name, but not a
legendary, good name. Not good though. And so, but that's what was so crazy is it stuck out as the best name among the list, and it was a bad name. And apparently none of the members wanted to share the details of what their previous names were. But the future drummer that would come along did share one of them, and one of the names was Black and Blue because there were 3 white guys with blue eyes and 1 black guy in the band. So that was pretty awful.
Yeah. The band name actually I don't think is terrible, but that sounds like it'd be like an 80s metal band, Black and Blue. But the reason behind it's pretty stupid. So, we talk about band names a lot. So now that the band was formed, they're booking gigs around the state. And they were a pure cover band at this point, with half their set list being REM songs. They recalled that whenever a new REM album would drop on a Tuesday, they would have 3 songs from the album on their set list by Friday. Apart from the REM stuff, they played things like the Beatles, U2, the Police, many others. And the band's circuit of shows they were playing included Gainesville, Florida, Athens, Georgia, Columbia, Charleston, Clemson, Rock Hill, all from South Carolina, the beach towns from South Carolina. Did I say that right? Yeah. As well as Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, all in North Carolina, and even Charlottesville, Virginia. So nice regional band there. By 1989, the band was basically playing every Thursday through Saturday and traveling around in a van that one of the guys owned, Road Warriors.
Oh, yeah.
They're making probably a couple $1,000s per night. That's really good for that time.
Right. That's what I was thinking. Like everything compared to the time is really good.
Yeah, really good. Around this time is when Brantley told the band that playing all these shows and partying just wasn't his path. He was very committed to his faith, told them that God had other plans for him, so he left very amicably and even waited for them to find his replacement. That's the right move. His last performance with the band was September 1st, 1989, and he was replaced with Jim Sonnefeld.
Yep.
And Jim was originally a soccer player that started for the university team. That is pretty good. It was his soccer was like his main focus, but he also played in a band before Hootie. And when they were auditioning for the band, Darius just really didn't like him because his girlfriend at the time had a crush on Sonny.
Yeah.
I don't like him.
Yeah.
So Darius basically was going to let him audition, but told the others there's no way he could join the band. But during the audition, Sonny showed the group a song he'd written called Hold My Hand. And Darius immediately came around, and Sonny's been a part of the group ever since. And the rest is history, I suppose. Hold My Hand's a pretty big song.
Yeah, definitely. That one made it all the way to their debut album, which is impressive. So it was kind of like just the grumpy, like, it was like, while Darius was courting his girlfriend, she had a huge crush on Sonny from the band that he was in currently. And he was like you look at a picture of him, he's like the long blonde hair, like the classic, like smile and stuff, like just like the girl's dream. And he's in a band. That's always the important part, right? And so It was just that, like, that biased hate, but then immediately after he showed them the song he wrote, it was like, oh my, this guy's like got potential. So it's kind of funny. Always bring a good original song to your tryouts, guys. Come on. It's imperative. Anyways, now that they had 4 permanent members and a couple of original songs, it was mixtape time. And so after one of their gigs, they just asked one of the sound guys to stick around and record them playing 5 of their originals, like a little live lineup with no audience in it. And so then the very next night, they played a venue in Charlotte, North Carolina, with another group called the Accelerators, who were managed by Dick Hodgen. And after Hootie played, Mark handed their cassette to Dick, and Dick, of course, didn't listen to it because he hated the name Hootie and the Blowfish. So instead, he passed it off to his assistant, Rusty Harmon. And Rusty gave it a listen and told Dick, you have to listen to this band. And after a little more convincing, Rusty played Dick a couple songs on the tape, and Dick decided to bring Hootie up to Raleigh for a little 5-day session at Jag Studios. I love the name Jag in football. At least the podcast I listen to, when you refer to someone as Jag, it just stands for just a guy. So like not an all-star, not anything, just a guy on the team. So every time I hear Jag Studios, I just think like the most like average, just bring in a band that like, these guys just play instruments. It's just what I think in my head.
Dick was impressed with Hootie because they came into the studio caring more about their overall sound than any individual member caring about their specific instrument, which is often the case. So the cassette they put together was simply called Hootie and the Blowfish. It was one of 3 EP mixtapes that Hootie would release before their debut album. The most notable song from the initial EP was Hold My Hand. After recording, Hootie packed up and went back to their regular gigging in Columbia. Rusty reached out a few weeks later when the EP was done and released and was asking the band how they were promoting it, how they were getting around, who was shopping their music, basically who's managing you guys. Of course, the band told him they were doing everything themselves. So Rusty pressed them to get a manager and asked the band if he could do it. Rusty told them no, or they asked the band if he would do it. Sorry, I misspoke. Rusty told them no multiple times because Rusty was supposed to get a job as one of the boom mic guys for the NC State football games.
He had the job lined up, baby.
Yeah. I can't do it. I got another gig. But the band invited him to come hang out for a weekend of shows, and Rusty drove all night and showed up around 5 a.m. And Darius was still awake and had just finished writing the song Time. Nice. That's probably my favorite. Rusty decided on the spot to become their manager. And going forward, every time the band and Rusty were watching football or even performing at football games, they would always point to the boom mic guys and say, Rusty, that could have been you. Yeah, that's hilarious.
I love that.
That is amazing.
Oh, so good. So Rusty's first order of business was to get the band on the Johnny Quest playbook. And Johnny Quest was another regional act that was managed by Dick Hodgen, his boss. And so the playbook essentially goes like this. And this is what Johnny did. And so they wanted to implement it with Hootie.
I think I'd actually heard of Johnny Quest.
Have you?
I think so.
I wanted to look it up because of what they described. They described Johnny Quest music as a mix between Red Hot Chili Peppers and Beastie Boys. So I was very intrigued.
That's cool. So when you get into the music scene like that, you start to meet all these older guys in the scene, and they know all the old band, like, oh, you should have heard blah, 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 back in the 90s, blah. It's like, I'd never heard of any of them until they said it. But then you start to kind of get into a glimpse into this world of like, who were the local bands that never really popped, 20 years ago. Like, and you start to meet some of those guys and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, it's so intriguing. They met a lot of local acts and played with a ton of local groups on just like from their constant like regional touring that they did. And I mean, you always mention to me when you guys do your tours how many bands you meet that you love and love their music and how many good bands there are. And you're always constantly putting me on new artists that you're playing with on your shows. So, anyways, getting into this playbook, it's a step-by-step process, basically. Step 1, you call up a frat or sorority and ask to play one of their events for free. They would just have to provide the PA system, basically. Step 2, you kill that shit so hard that the frat or sorority calls you back and books you for another event, but paid this time. And then step 3, you play 2 or 3 shows at that frat or sorority, and then book a local rock club and pack it out with a lot of people from those parties. And then you play another show or 2 at that rock club once you've established that you can bring a crowd, make money from it. And then step 4, you expand. So most fraternities and sororities are national organizations. And so you can call that same division of the frat or sorority in a different city at like a different college. And you can tell them you just played for, their organization and had a very successful show. And you can even call them right away as a reference, and ask how well they did. And so then step 5, you'd repeat step 3 in the new city. So you go to the new city, play at the college parties, book the local club, pack it with the kids from the parties, and you just rinse and repeat throughout all kinds of different cities and colleges. And basically just continue to do that, and you can make a living doing that.
Yeah. The goal is essentially following this playbook will allow you to book any club in any region. So it's a very demanding process for the band and requires a lot of traveling and a lot of work, but Hootie loved every minute of it. They were pretty big partiers themselves, so it fit right into their lifestyle. By doing the Johnny Quest playbook, Hootie worked themselves up to make between $5 to $10,000 per show. That's massive. Even now, especially.
I know, right? And this was in the early 90s. They were making that money.
Yeah, that's crazy. And Hootie did this cycle from about 1990 till 1994, working their way all over the East Coast. So they really put in the work and gave it the time to kind of yield the results. So from Florida all the way up to Vermont even. Pretty early in this process, the band landed themselves a lawyer on retainer. And this guy's name was Gus Gusler.
So good, dude.
I don't want to laugh at him, but Gus Gusler, come on.
That's got to be.
He was recommended by Dick Hodgen. So Gus said he no longer worked with musicians, told them no. This is literally the story of their life.
Right.
It's way too common in this story so far, but they all showed up at his door anyways. And they just wanted to ask him some questions, so he obliged. Right away, he was taken aback by the focus of the band. He hated working with musicians because all they care about is music and not the business side of things. Right off the bat, they told him they wanted to create an LLC, put the van under it so Sonny wouldn't be solely liable. They also wanted to set up retirement plans and health insurance. Gus actually asked the band, "Are you guys really fucking musicians?" Gus was so impressed that he took on the band. Yeah, it is far too common. I don't know that most musicians would know even most of that stuff that we just read.
Right. That's so funny. Of course, I love
LLC, yeah.
Yeah, I love the business side of things. So that was like, oh, this is really smart by them, but not common in like musicians. Just like, oh, I just want people to hear me play. That's all they care about. But like, there's the whole business side, and that's something you have a good grasp on. Is like, there's the business side of thing is equally, if not more important than, unfortunately. I mean, you can be an awesome band, but if you don't have any grasp of the business side of things, you're not going to grow, you're not going to expand, you're not going to make money, and there's so many issues that can happen there.
And to the point of that story with Mr. Gus Gusler, which is really just too close to being Guzzler, for my taste. But you do meet so many musicians that don't know what they're talking about. So when you don't really have to know that much to like impress someone. They're like, oh, this guy actually knows something. Like,
yeah, even just the basics.
So it's a low bar is what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure. But they did hit the low bar. They passed it. So he was good
for sure.
So anyways, in 1993, the band would historically be signed by Atlantic Records, but before that, they actually got signed in 1992 by JRS. And so let's talk about that blunder for a bit. An A&R rep for JRS named Stan Schuster was attending a show of theirs in Atlanta, and after the performance, he knew he had to work with these guys. And Stan flew back to LA and told his boss, Artie Mogul, that he wanted to sign the band. And the label actually offered Hootie $250,000 with $100,000 set aside to record an album. And the band drove out to LA to sign their deal with without the legal advisor Gus's approval. So he looks back and recalls this being like one of 2 times that the band acted without listening to his advice. And Gus wanted the band to stay patient and wait for better offers. And anyways, the band played a showcase for JRS and signed their deal and returned to Columbia in preparations to record an album. And they were actually booked for Reflection Studios in Charlotte, North Carolina. And on the other side of things, back in LA, Stan got a call from a higher up named Steven Swid. And can we appreciate all the alliteration going on in everyone's names this episode?
I know, you got Stan Schuster, Steven Swid, Gus
Gusler. Dude, it doesn't even stop. There's a couple more. It's crazy.
Not an alliteration, but Artie Mogul is also a pretty legendary name.
Yeah, I love that. It's a good name. God, you just have to have such a solid name to be in the music business, it seems.
I know, right? Artie Mogul.
Artie Mogul.
Mogul's already in his name.
Right. Anyways, Steven told Stan that Hootie was nothing but a shitty cover band and that they weren't going to fund the project. And as it got closer and closer to the studio sessions, the money for the sessions wasn't coming in. And Stan was really trying to fight to keep Hootie on the label, and Steven just wasn't having it. So Steven ended up dropping Hootie and firing Stan for this. And so Gus was able to put together a lawsuit against JRS to scrape together enough money to still allow the band to go to the studio, where they actually put together their first EP called Coochie Pop. So that's nice. That's a fun one.
So right before Coochie Pop was released on... No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think this is the only one listed as an EP, and the others were just like mixtapes, so they didn't exactly get like the same kind of... so they had the Hootie and the Blowfish like tape, and then they did the Coochie Pop EP, and then they released like another tape called Time. But I think this is the only one listed as an EP and the only one you can really find anywhere.
Yeah. Coochie Pop. Sounds like it'd be more hip hop than kind of, rock. Yeah. But anyway, right before Coochie Pop was released on November 1st, 1992, Darius's mother, Carolyn Rucker, passed away at age 51. And Darius didn't really open up about this with his bandmates and didn't even cancel any shows. He just powered through. He would later write the songs I'm Going Home and Not Even the Trees about his mother's passing. These songs would appear on their debut album, but back to the Coochie Pop EP. It had 3 notable songs on it: The Old Man and Me, Only Want to Be With You, and Hold My Hand. This being an updated version of Hold My Hand from before. The acoustic guitar part on Only Want to Be With You is actually inspired by 2 things. The band had been playing shows with Dylan Fence, and Mark noticed that their guitar player, Greg Humphreys, frequently used capos. So Mark tried out some capos and started doing his favorite strumming pattern from Pinball Wizard, and the guitar part for Only Want to Be With You was born. I'm trying to remember how that one goes. Is that the...
Yep.
That one?
Yep. That's, the big one. Yeah, that was like his first time. For anybody
that's cool.
that don't know what capos is, that's the little clip that they put on the end of the guitar. You could probably explain it way better than I can. You actually play guitar.
Yeah, it just changes the key of the guitar. So if you look at a guitar up by the tuning peg area, the headstock, you have what's called the nut. It's usually a white strip of, used to be bone. Now it's like plastic. Sometimes it's black. So depending on the guitar you're looking at, you might be hard to see in a picture. That's your fret 0. So when you just strum the guitar without putting any fingers on it, that's what you're hearing. Capo moves that fret 0. So it changes your key, basically. So you can, and what it's meant for is you can use all the basic chord shapes called cowboy chords, but change the key so you can play other keys and other chords, right? So if I play a G chord and then I capo on the first fret and play a G chord, now I'm playing a G sharp, right? So that's like, if I asked you to play a G sharp without a capo, you'd probably have a hell of a time, unless you're a relatively experienced guitar player. So that allows you to do what I call the Taylor Swift method. You only learn 4 or 5 chords, and then you just capo around the guitar, and you can play in any key.
Gotcha. Nice.
Some people think of them as cheat codes. I don't really agree with that, but is what it is.
Yeah. So anyways, during the Coochie Pop recordings, the band also had full-time jobs outside of the band. And Mark was working at Channel 57. It was a Fox TV affiliate for Columbia. he was editing commercials and doing things like that. And then Sonny worked for Instructional Service Center for the University of South Carolina. Dean was working at JD Sticky's, a local tavern. And Darius worked some shifts at JD Sticky's and also at a local record store called Sounds Familiar, which I just love. That's such a good album store name, or a record store.
Yeah, that's really cool. The only record store I know in Columbia is Papa Jazz. I don't know if Sounds Familiar is probably not there anymore.
Yeah, so I'm assuming it didn't stand the test of time.
I did see a Papa Jazz sticker like 2 days ago.
Did you?
Which blew my mind.
Where at? Up there or?
Yeah, just somewhere over up here. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. So, anyways, The group was finally making enough money that they could quit their jobs and decided to go full time in the band.
Yep. So that moves us into 1993. The band was scarred from their previous record deal, but still kept being Hootie. They pushed forward without thinking twice, continued to play about 200 shows per year. That was significantly more than just weekends.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this was like after they went full time, that was about the pace they were going was.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess that's probably like weekends plus Thursdays and like the occasional Sunday, you know?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That would probably add about right. So anyway, before the band was signed to Atlantic Records, the band was making anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000 per year, according to Gus. And this will come into play when we talk about their Atlantic Records signing, which we're going to do right now.
So as for the signing, it all started with Scott Schiff. More alliteration. Dude. Yeah, dude. It just doesn't stop. It just keeps coming. Anyways, he worked under Dick Vanderbilt and Nick Casanelli? Yeah, sorry. I just my brain shut down when I read that.
I'd probably say Casanelli, but I'm just guessing.
No, that sounds absolutely correct. Anyways, Nick Casanelli at Atlantic Records, and he worked in an actual storage closet that had a desk shoved in it. That's fun.
It's like some Parks and Rec stuff.
Right. Yeah. He worked for Retail Information Services, which is a division that basically just calls around, inquires on new bands and sees what's selling. And it really does they really just do a lot of reconnaissance for the company and do deeper dives into local areas, just like searching the underground to see if there's any potential, anything. And on August 12th, 1993, 4 days after I was born, Scott remembers this day because he was turning 24, but he was making his routine calls to South Carolina, and he spoke with the store manager in Columbia and asked if there was anything interesting going on locally. And the manager responded by saying nothing at all. And Scott just couldn't leave it at that. He dug a little deeper because he just had this weird hunch, and so he decided to press him and was like, "Are you sure there's nothing you're not thinking of? Something you've overlooked?" And the manager replied, "Well, there's this group called Hootie the Blowfish. They're a local college band that's been around for a while. Everyone knows about them, and they're really popular around here. No big companies seem interested in them, so I figured you guys probably already knew about them in past." And Scott hit the manager with a ton of follow-up questions about retail numbers for their EP Coochie Pop, and just basically how many people come in asking for it, how many move off the shelf, every retail question, to the point that he actually was on the phone so long that he was late for his own birthday party.
That's hilarious.
But Scott was extremely intrigued and decided to reach out, and he calls Rusty Harmon and expressed his interest in recording, and he wanted him to send him their EP. He wanted bios of the band. He wanted pictures of the band, just the whole, to create a package, to present. And he was pretty shocked when Rusty responded with, "Why should I?" He said, "Every label passed on us, including Atlantic, and we're doing just fine on our own. I don't need to get everyone's hopes up. And frankly, it's not worth my walk to the post office." And thank goodness Scott didn't leave it at that, because Rusty almost hung up on him. But Scott pressed him a little harder, and Rusty finally agreed to send him their music.
Yep. So Scott then sent the music to Tim Summer, an A&R representative for Atlantic. Tim was actually the author of the book that you read for this episode, right?
Yep.
So. I'm going to get it as soon as I see you next. I'm going to read it myself. So Tim listened to the Coochie Pop EP and was not blown away, but liked the music enough to be intrigued. So he called Rusty, wanted to come see the band play live. He came and saw them in Charleston, and within the first 45 seconds of hearing them play, he knew he was signing them at any cost. Those kind of sentences always make me raise my eyebrows because I never know how true they are. Because that's something you would want to say with hindsight, you know?
Yeah, it was more so like, so he shows up. There's like a whole story. It's kind of how he opens the book, is that he was due to some rain. His flight got delayed. He thought he was going to miss the show in Charleston, and he thought he was going to have to stay somewhere overnight and see them in Columbia the next night. So he gets there like right before the show starts. And Rusty greets him with like 2 shots of Jägermeister. Just, that's like a big, Jaeger is like a huge thing with Hootie and the Blowfish. Like, God, they always do shots of Jaeger. So anyways, 2 shots down, and it was more so like the band played, but really it was like the reaction. The crowd were like singing every word, like just like the atmosphere was really what sold him. Like, oh, these guys can be something. So it was more so just like the whole experience, I guess. And he even says like, this is something that you never, ever, ever want to do as an A&R representative, is like, I want to sign these guys, or even tell them that you want to sign them. You should never, ever do that. And he said he broke the rules with these guys. So it's funny that you do mention that, because he even talks about how it's a big no-no to like have that train of thought, like, oh, I got to sign these guys. So
it's just one of those things like where whenever you hear about anyone involved in any band that blew up, you always have so many people that are like, I always knew they were going to be. It's like, no, you didn't. Like,
you know, when your band blows up, I'm going to say, I remember when they sucked.
Yeah, exactly. I remember thinking, damn, them?
Them?
you never hear anyone say that. You never hear anyone be like, really? I saw them. I didn't think they were that good. That blows my mind. They got signed. Like, you know, it's always people. It's the hipster thing of like,
yeah,
you know, I knew before anyone else. Like, it's that kind of thing. Like, oh, I always knew they were big. It's like, bro, I remember you never came to a show. Like, I invited you every week. Like,
oh, man.
But anyway, getting back to it. It was now October of 1993, and Ashton was a little baby.
Yep. Real small.
You were born in August, right? Yeah.
Yep.
And the band was doing business as usual, even with a looming record deal from Atlantic. Around this time, many labels were throwing stupid money at bands with huge advances. And after the sudden rise of grunge, many labels were late to the grunge party and started trying to strike gold everywhere. So when the deal came, Rusty told the label that the band didn't want an advance. They just wanted Atlantic to pay for the record. That's brilliant. That's the move. Do you know what advances are? Do you know how all that works?
Yes, they had to explain it out to me. So essentially, like, you know, they give you the advance, but you have to pay that money back through album sales and whatnot.
Yeah, a record label is basically a bank with a horrific like loan term. Mm-hmm. Like if a bank was going to give you a loan with the terms a record deal would, you would laugh and leave the bank and be like, nope. But for whatever reason, because it's a record label, people think it's so good. So what happens is, this is where so many people get in trouble. Like Guns N' Roses, for example, they'll get $100,000 each as an advance, right? Mm-hmm. And they go out and buy drugs and cars and houses and all these things. 100,000 is not enough for all that, but you know what I mean? Because eventually it would have been that much. And then it's time to pay it all back, and the record tanks and nobody buys it. Now, of course, that wasn't the case for Hootie or Guns or many other bands, but for a lot of bands, it is the case. Mm-hmm. Well, now you screwed yourself for your whole life because they got to get their money back, and they're not going to get it from music, so they're going to come after you. Yep. So that's Rusty saying, we don't want an advance. That's smart. Just pay for the record. So the band had a little over $300,000 in their bank account, so money wasn't a problem for them. Of course, this was unheard of for a band to decline any advance. But and Gus was pretty furious when he first heard that Rusty declined the advance. But after Rusty explained how bands get dropped all the time due to taking advances and not panning out, like I was just saying, Gus agreed that Rusty did the right thing. Go Gus Gusler. Nice job.
Yep.
The band members were all personally making probably $30,000 to $40,000 per year. They all had health insurance, so money wasn't really what they were looking for. They just wanted to record an album. So on October 31st, 1993, Hootie signed a 7-album record deal with Atlantic Records. That is a big deal.
Yeah, I know, right? I hate those deals.
7 albums.
The more I read, like they always sign you up for like an unrealistic amount of albums. Like, and honestly, going into the record deal, all Hootie, like really their goal was like get to a second album, because they were like, most bands never get to the second album. You know, like, yeah, you can record the first and it usually doesn't pan out, but if you can get to the second album, that was always their goal. So it was an interesting goal to go in with, but it worked out. So anyways, Hootie wouldn't hit the studio for about 6 months after the signing, which is pretty common. They have to do a bunch of paperwork, you know, pick a producer, pick a studio, all kinds of things. And so the band had to select a producer, and they wanted to go with Don Dixon, more alliteration. But Tim knew he knew who he wanted for these guys, and he wanted Don Gehman. That's how I'm gonna say that. Don Gehman had
gay man.
I know, right? I mean, it could be, but Don Gehman had worked with REM and also did basically every John Mellencamp record. Any famous John Mellencamp song that you have ever heard, Gehman was the producer for it. And so Tom chose Gehman for a couple of reasons. First, the REM and Mellencamp association. He just thought that was a good sound for the band, that he would really be able to bring out their best. But also, he noticed on the Coochie Pop EP that because of Darius's deep, rich vocals, he had a tendency to sing flat, and he really wanted a producer that was going to push them to be their best. And I love this story. A couple of funny little stories about the keyboards and piano that would be tracked for the album. The band didn't have like a keyboard player on retainer, but they wanted some keys for about 5 tracks. And so Tim called up John Nau, N-A-U. I'm sure it's pronounced very differently.
Sounds good to me.
But yeah, Nau. He played for a local jam band called the Zoo People. What do you think about that name?
Seems like a zoo person came up with it.
Right? Exactly. Anyways, so Tim sent John the tracks that he wanted to play on a few days before John would come to the studio. And so to clarify real quick, he just sent him the songs. No piano parts were written.
Right. That makes sense. So you send the track and you say, hey, here's what you're going to play over. Come up with something. We'll see you on Saturday. You know, whatever.
Exactly. So when recording time came, John sat at the piano and, how did I say? Gehman. Yep. Sorry. Gehman played the 5 tracks consecutively without any breaks or second takes or anything. And after John was finished, Gehman told John he did great and he could come sign the paperwork. And John walked in with this concerned look on his face and asked to speak to Tim privately. And once they were alone, John looked at like he was basically on the verge of tears, and he was like, we've got to do second take. We've got to take them again. And Tim replied, but John, that was perfect. Absolutely gorgeous. To which John replied, but Tim, I never listened to the cassette you sent me. This is the first time I heard any of these songs. Please give me another shot. I assumed we were just practicing and getting levels. Now I know how they go. Please let me do them again. And Tim conferred with Gehman, and Gehman said that the takes were fantastic and there was absolutely no reason to waste their time doing additional takes. So, fun fact, all the piano and keyboard parts were done improvised on the spot without a second take, which is absolutely incredible in my opinion, right?
I've heard, plenty of first take stories, but that's a pretty crazy one.
Yeah, it was, and it was. So apparently he had a jazz background. So that's what Gehman said, is that because of his jazz background, he was able to basically immediately adjust to the key and play something that sounded good throughout all of them, just on the spot. And I guess that was a pretty good. It's a pretty good thing to have in your pocket. So that's pretty crazy. Yeah. And that's another fun fact.
It's really good.
Right? It reminded me of just recently, I looked at I watched a video on Great Gig in the Sky for Pink Floyd, and the singer for that did 2 takes, and she was in the middle of the third, and they brought her in with no plan, no idea of what they wanted. She started singing some hey yeah, and they were like, no, we don't want any words. So then she was like, all right, just roll it, whatever. Did 2 takes. But I think they mainly used the first one. And during the third, she just stopped and goes, I don't think we're going to do any better than that. And just went about her way. And so that's another one of those barely any takes, legendary performances. But anyways, there was one other story, another fun fact. They did a cover for the song I Go Blind, which didn't appear on the debut album.
Wait, that's a cover?
Yep. It's by a Canadian band. I can't remember.
Because I know that song really well. That was one of their really big ones.
Yep.
That was one of the ones I learned, but I didn't know that was a cover.
So that song would later appear on the soundtrack to Friends, which we'll talk about a little bit. And so they needed something more from a keyboard perspective on the song. And so John tried something since they had him in the studio, and they had two other engineers try, but nothing was sounding right. And Tim said, let me have a try. And he went into the room, sat down, and then just simply pressed the D note an octave above middle C and held it for 2 minutes during the song. And this was on an organ. And
okay. Yeah.
And he just holds it all the way through and then stops and walks back in the room to a full room of smiles because they knew that was exactly it. And you can go and listen. It's literally just one D key, like held through the whole 2 minutes of the song. That's so awesome. Funny.
I love stories like that.
I know, just like, simplicity sometimes is what you're looking for.
Yeah, layer it on. So once the sessions were finished, the album was being mixed and had a release date set for July 5th, 94. But before that, the album was almost terminated. So Tim was in his office, and Jason Flom, the head of A&R, I know that name, walked into his office and wanted to hear the final record. They played it and sat in silence the entire 45 minutes. So after it finished, Jason told Tim, there's no single on this record, not one. I had heard good things about this band and we expected more here, but it just didn't make it to tape. Or maybe we made the wrong record with the wrong producer. This is unreleasable. We're not releasing this record. Jason walked out and left Tim heated. I can imagine. After a minute of simmering, Tim got up and walked in Danny Goldberg's office, which is Jason's boss. Said, Danny, Jason just told me that he doesn't hear any singles on the Hootie and the Blowfish record, and he doesn't want to release the album. His exact words were that it's unreleasable. Danny, I respectfully disagree. I want us to put out this record. Danny's exact words were, quote, Timmy, if it means that much to you, we'll put it out. And that was that. The record would be released. So,
thank God they had people fighting for him.
Jason Flom put the biggest foot in existence into his mouth.
Right.
So let's talk about it.
So, Cracked Rear View was released July 5th, 1994. And the album had great sales at first, but then dipped in August. And Hootie was almost dropped from the label. And they speculate that the reason they weren't dropped during this dip in sales was because it basically cost Atlantic nothing to do the album because they didn't, take an advance or anything. They were
right
cheap. So they were almost dropped until this dude named Dave Letterman was driving home and heard one of their songs on the radio. And he immediately pulled over, called his producer and said, we have to get Hootie and Blowfish on the Tonight Show. And just 3 days after that occurrence, Hootie appeared on Dave Letterman's Tonight Show. And that would basically give them that blow up that they needed. And the album would eventually peak at number 1 on the Billboard 200. It spent nearly the entire summer of 1995 at number 1. And which we always talk about, it fits into that like summer vibes, like Sister Hazel and stuff. Just like what a great kind of music to just toss on during summer, driving around at the beach.
Yeah, call it tailgate rock.
Tailgate rock, that's right.
And the reason is if you're at a tailgate for like a college sports event, growing up for us, it was Clemson, Carolina, whatever. And you're walking around and you're hearing all the sounds and smelling all the food. There's always a band that sounds like Hootie and the Blowfish playing somewhere. And you can't tell where they are, but the music just permeates the air. Mm-hmm. And it's tailgate rock. Sister Hazel's the same way. There's a lot of bands like that, but Hootie's the king. They're the king of tailgate rock. They pretty much, in my opinion, they kind of invented it.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there. So, for the album singles, the first single was Hold My Hand, which we've talked about quite a few times now, which peaked at number 10 on the Billboard 100.
Look at that. Imagine, it's cool that song was on every EP up to this point, and they just kept believing in it, and there it hits number 10. That's gratifying. That
confirmation. And remember, that was the one that Sonny brought in his, that he wrote and brought in. So real quick, that just reminded me. So the way they do all of their song credits is they just credit Hootie and the Blowfish, all members equally, even if one entire song is written by one member or one song is written by 4 members, they credit to everyone. Therefore, nobody is upset about how many of each of their songs made it to the record or whatever. They always had the mindset of it's like they're a team. It's all about the group. No individual person stands above the rest, which is really respectable.
That's definitely one way to do it. There's no rule.
There's no rule for that.
Every person would get 25% in that case.
Yep, that's how they split. Yep, that's how they split all of their royalty stuff.
Where you get into trouble with that kind of almost like, I know this word has a negative connotation, but in this instance, like communist kind of doing of it, is when like one person's clearly the songwriter and they're having to basically give away all their shares to other people that aren't doing anything. That's where you start to get into trouble with that kind of process. So some bands can pull it off, some bands cannot. Like, for example, we talked about Creedence Clearwater Revival. If John Fogerty was having to give away writing credits to 3 guys that weren't contributing in any way, I'm sure he would be feel like he was getting taken advantage of, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Man, I'm doing all the work. Like, I know we're all playing together on stage and we're splitting the money equally there, but I'm doing all the writing. Like, when it comes time to take the writing money, like, that's going to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, at least with this group, and I think one of the reasons that it did work is they were all pretty decent.
Yeah, they're all involved. It seems
songwriters. Like, there wasn't like one guy that just never wrote any songs. So they would all write songs, and it didn't matter who was part of the writing process or whatever. Just at the end when they did the album, they just picked the songs they liked the most, and there was no any bias.
I love the romantic notion of the Democratic band where everything's equal and stuff. But the older I get, the more I want the credit to go wherever it needs to go, wherever it's fair to go.
Yeah, they lived in magical Christmas land, and they were able to pull it off.
They were able to make it work. But you're part of a sales team. You're doing 80% of the sales. You're not going to make, equal money with everyone else. It's just how it goes.
Exactly. So moving on to the second single from the album, it was Let Her Cry, which reached number 9 on the Billboard 100. Oh yeah, great song. The third single release was Only Want to Be With You, which peaked at number 6 on the Billboard 100.
So that's their top peaking one, right?
I do believe so.
What do you think of that song? Do you like that song?
I like that song. I think that was the first song I'd heard by them. I like Time a lot,
kid,
like you said.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Only Want to Be With You was actually covered by Post Malone not too long ago for Pokemon.
Really? I did not listen to that. No, I got to go listen to that immediately after.
I think it was last summer, maybe. There was a big Pokemon convention or anniversary or something, and Post Malone covered Only Want to Be With You for Pokemon. And just thinking about that sentence, Post Malone covers Hootie and the Blowfish for Pokemon. Like, what?
Dude, right. What
Why
a headline.
Does any of this, none of these things fit with any of the other things.
That's a journalist headline dream.
I know.
So many keywords.
So Only Want to Be With You was the third single, but the fourth single was Time, which is another one of my favorites. We were playing it before we jumped on the podcast here, which peaked at 14 on the Billboard 100. So a lot of top 10s, and then number 14. The fifth and final single was Drowning, which when I read that, I was like, not sure I heard that. And then I see failed to hit the Billboard 100. So there you go.
Yeah. As for album sales, this blew my mind because I had no clue that it was this big. But the album has currently sold about 23 million copies, making it double diamond or 23 times platinum. Like, dude, Jesus.
Yeah, that's wild.
My goodness, for a debut, it's absolutely insane. And the album cover, like we mentioned, is a bunch of pictures taken on the University of South Carolina campus. Yep. And just kind of like, there's a little bit of editing done, so it's not like super clear images, but you can basically make out all the different places. And
the big one is, I think it might be the back of that album cover, is all the guys sitting on the steps to the theater.
Yep.
Is that on the back or
on the corner?
There's a prominent Hootie picture where that is there. I don't know where that picture is, but I have seen it before. That's
on the back. It's on the back. You're right.
Okay. So it's, all the places we used to walk by all the time. So it really means a lot to people that go to USC. And Darius often, maybe not every year, but like pretty often, every other year, every couple years, he goes to USC and plays some sort of thing for the campus.
That's awesome.
Some sort of concert, some sort of thing where he's there and does something.
They play in Columbia a lot.
They're there in a month or so.
Yep.
So Hootie would end up winning 2 Grammys for this album. They won Best Pop Performance by a duo or group with vocals. That is very specific.
Dude, I know.
And
it's not the first time I've seen that one.
Specifically for Let Her Cry. And then they also won Best New Artist. So that's pretty big. So after this, they went on their first big tour, as well as their first tour to Europe. So for their big tour in the U.S., they were opening for the group Toad the Wet Sprocket. That's weird. I mean, I know Toad, of course, but Hootie's much bigger than Toad in my mind, at least. So maybe that was just, maybe that's how it played out in time, and it wasn't at this time. But after a few shows, everyone realized that most people attending were coming in for Hootie and not Toad. But Hootie refused to switch the billing and to have them headlining, which is a stand-up move. It's Toad's tour, and they didn't want to cross that line out of respect. So instead, the groups basically started coming on stage for each other's sets and basically just played together for most of the shows. That's super cool of Toad as well. The only comments members from Toad made were how much golf Hootie played. So Hootie and the Blowfish loved sports. They all brought clubs with them everywhere they went and would play golf nearly every morning. They were also known to make basketball goals spontaneously appear. Darius himself is a huge Miami Dolphins fan and even landed Dan Marino in their famous ESPN music video for Only Want to Be With You.
You should go and watch that if you haven't. It's
a lot of big sports fans there.
It's funny because it's in the mid 90s, so ESPN is like a small network then, like really small. They only had one channel, the same like 5 guys, which is so crazy to think about now because of how huge ESPN is, like how massive that network. But at the time, it wasn't very big, so they had some famous basketball players. They had a couple of famous golfers. They had Dan Marino. So they had like a couple of, some athletes, and it was like their dream come true. And it was actually Tim's idea for the music video. Before one of their shows, he went up to Darius and was like, dude, what if you guys had a music video that was just like, it was like a regular ESPN show, but in all the clips that they're showing and are you guys just like being stupid and being yourselves and whatnot. And he just loved it, and the whole band loved it. And it was actually just really cool that because it ended up getting played on VH1 and MTV. And it was interesting that they made that decision because they were promoting another network through theirs. You know what I mean? Through the music video. Yeah. So it was actually just great publicity for everybody at the end of it. Anyways, they were also included in Encomium. Is that how you say that? I don't think I've ever listened to this. It's a tribute album.
I don't know this either.
Yeah, it's a tribute album to Led Zeppelin that I think it was Atlantic that put it together. I can't remember who it was, but they had a bunch of different artists come and do different Led Zeppelin songs on it. I'll have to go and listen. I listened to their performance of the song they did, but I haven't listened to that whole album. So Hootie performed the song, Hey, Hey, What Can I Do for the album. And this is also around the time when their cover of I Go Blind was released on the soundtrack for the TV show Friends. So that was cool. And they were also one of the groups invited to Frank Sinatra's 80th birthday party or birthday production. Now, I got to mention, Frank didn't throw this party. It was like the music industry threw this for him. And so Frank and his wife had like a little table like up front, set aside. But anyways, after like the whole night, like Frank had just basically just unemotionally, just straight face listened to all the performances, like because it was everybody doing their own renditions of his songs and things like that. And so Hootie went and performed The Lady is a Tramp, and Darius rocked a full suit with a fedora, like the classic look, tried his absolute best to enunciate words instead of what we were talking about, his Eddie Vedder style of vocals. I think you said it sounds like he sings with marbles in his mouth.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, occasionally. Yeah, so it actually is like known as one of Darius's best performances ever. Unfortunately, all the recordings for it are really bad because of, it being the mid 90s. But anyways, after the performance, or during this performance, it was the only one in which Sinatra actually showed any emotion to. He was smiling, snapping his fingers, and absolutely like loved it. It was like the only one of the whole night that he actually like appreciated, which is hilarious. But he would actually later invite them to one of his own personal birthday parties later on, a couple years later.
It's gotta be a big honor
to play, right? Like even if you don't like him, he's just so legendary.
I know, right? So Cracked Rear View is definitely a debut album that you could just retire off of. You're done. That wouldn't have been the Hootie way. They actually kind of rushed the process instead of letting their record hit and like continue to simmer because it had so much buzz around it. So the band hopped into the studio and put together their second album, Fairweather Johnson. Fairweather Johnson was released on April 23rd, 1996. The album debuted at number 1 with their Cracked Rear View still on the charts right there with it. The sales for the album were very high at first, but tapered off really quickly. In fact, the album appeared on Pitchfork's list of 10 career-killing albums of the 90s. That's not a fun list to be on. Nope. The album has since gone 3 times platinum. It had 2 singles. The first was The Old Man and Me, parentheses, When I Get to Heaven. Old Man and Me, that's one of their big songs for sure.
Yep.
That I'm familiar with. I need to go back and listen to it because I'm really having a hard time thinking of it. But that peaked at number 13 on the Billboard 100. The second single was Tuckerstown, which peaked at number 38 on the Billboard 100. I'm not as familiar with that one either. The band, looking back, really regrets releasing their follow-up album so soon after their debut record. So singles from the album were still being released in early 96. And then they released the second album like right there. Like there was never a break. So of course the second album wasn't going to be able to touch the first because that's just insane. Lightning in a bottle, as they say. But if they hadn't rushed the process, might have had better results.
Yeah, and Darius recalls that, like, I think during the recording for that, so for the recording for Cracked Review, they did it in 18 days. The process was done. So really quick, really efficient. Apparently the recording for Fairweather Johnson was one of those where constantly in and out of the studio over a course of time, and he had just had his daughter. They were touring. They were like one of the biggest music acts in 95, and so there was just no breaks, nothing. It was just straight into like more music. So it was just a very rushed process from his recollection. And so after a couple years of touring, Hootie jumped into the studio and released their third album, Musical Chairs, on September 15th, 1998. They had some hopes of recapturing the essence of their debut, not necessarily the success, but just getting back to what, they like to do with music and their recording style. But once again, the album flopped, and it sold about 1 million copies to date. And the album peaked at number 4 on the Billboard 200, and it had 3 singles: I Will Wait, Only Lonely, and Wishing. But I Will Wait being the only one of the 3 that actually made any noise. It didn't hit the Billboard 100, but it hit another Billboard chart.
How good and successful was your first album when your third one goes platinum and you still say it flopped?
Right.
That's crazy. So their fourth album came 5 years after that, March 4th, 2003. This album is their self-titled album and their last release under Atlantic Records. I guess they got out of that seven album deal because this would have been the fourth. This was their first album to not have a single hit any charts. It was also their lowest selling record. And fun fact, it's your second favorite. This is the one you sent me, right?
Yep. I love this album, man. This blew my mind. I was like, what? I feel like this one's good.
Yeah, a lot of solid songs. I listened to it as well. The 2 singles for the album were Innocence and Space. The album was only able to reach 46 on the Billboard 200. That's still awesome. Like 46, dude. Even touching the Billboard 200 is great, especially after clearly they're on the back end of the bell curve, Although, to be fair, they were not a bell curve. They were basically a roller coaster. Started at the very top and just straight down. But
yeah, exactly.
That top was really high, so they still hit some really good things on the way down.
So after a couple years of touring medium-sized venues, they had kind of been, out of their prime for a little bit. Hootie put out their 5th studio album, Looking for Lucy. This album was released August 9th, 2005, under the labels Sneaky Long and Vanguard. And the album had sold only around 150,000 copies and didn't chart. And it, once again, didn't have any notable singles. So this band really has just like an interesting venture, in my opinion. Like, they peaked at their debut album. So then that got me curious. I was like, how many other bands have had like a similar path that Hootie has, where your best album is your first album? And so I looked it up, and here's
Guns is one. Most people would agree.
Here's a list of some notable successful
debuts. Before you get into that
debuts.
list,
You want to guess some?
Tiny little. Well, on a quick little side note, the Guns N' Roses one, I think there's a list of best-selling debuts of all time. I want to say Appetite might be the number 1.
Is it?
I need to confirm that, but I'll confirm that while you hit me with these debuts.
Okay, so I looked it up to see like some of the most successful debut albums, and you have Pearl Jam's 10, Jimi Hendrix Experience, being that titled. Then you have Van Halen's self-titled debut, Van Halen, Nirvana's Bleach, Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell, The Cars' self-titled debut, Boston's self-titled debut, the Beastie Boys' License to Ill, and the Doors' self-titled debut. And there was more, but that's like a big list of some big artists. And looking back at some of the songs, like a lot of their biggest hits. Now, a lot of those bands did continue to put out more successful albums than Hootie did, but that list is like their debuts were their best performing albums, going forward. So
I don't know if this is their best performing, but here's a list of the top 10 best-selling debut albums of all time.
Ooh, I'm excited.
Which I just skimmed through it and did not see Hootie on here. And as you're going to find out, that can't be right because they're at 23 million. So I don't know how they're calculating this. So take this with a grain of salt. But Jewel, Pieces of You, her first album, 12 million. Pearl Jam, we talked about that. That's 13 million. Backstreet Boys, we'll talk about them soon, 14 million. Matchbox 20, that says more than 15 million. It doesn't give a specific number. Boston, it's their first album, which had all their big hits. Literally all of the songs of that were huge Boston hits, and that's 20 million. Oh, here it is. I missed it. Hootie and the Blowfish, Cracked Review, 21 million. We know that's 23 now. Whitney Houston, 22 million. Britney Spears, that's Baby One More Time, 25 million. Linkin Park, 30 million. Wow.
Oh,
and then coming in the number one spot just over Linkin Park is Appetite for Destruction.
What's the sales numbers on that one?
It says 30 million as well, so it must be real close to Linkin Park, which that was
one
Hybrid
still
Theory,
probably goes up though. Even though people don't buy albums nowadays, they still sell that album. I bet to this day.
I bet all these still get sold. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Once you get those iconic albums, like when you go into record stores and see vinyls and stuff, like you're still getting album sales there and like CDs and whatnot. So yeah, I bet it still trickles in. So
getting back to our boys, after the release of their fifth album, Darius Rucker announced that the band will be going on hiatus in order for him to pursue a solo career as a country artist. I remember this. I was around and starting music, and I remember everyone being like, Hootie's going country, what? All that stuff. The band wasn't breaking up. They just weren't going to be touring or recording anything until further notice. So Darius' solo career resulted in the albums Learn to Live, Charleston, South Carolina, 1966. That's where he lives now. True Believers, Home for the Holidays, Southern Style, and his most recent album, Carolyn's Boy. Without diving too much into his solo career, he's had a really successful one. So you know his cover of the song Wagon Wheel. You might also know the song All Right. He's got a few others, and just really good. We play All Right. It's in our set, and every time we play it, everyone sings. Everybody. So all ages. So that may be in part to the region we're in, but he's absolutely crushed it as a country artist, and it's good stuff too. It's not he's not phoning it in. It doesn't feel fake. It's really nice. I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. I think he's a great artist. Great country voice.
I love seeing evolution too,
Oh yeah, for sure.
I love AC/DC, Iron Maiden. I love those bands, but after a while, it's kind of like, all right, you just did another album that's the same album as the last one. So while you have crafted an amazing sound that I love, I would love to see a little evolution there as well.
Mm-hmm. So in 2015, Hootie actually reunited to play on The Late Show with David Letterman again for a final time before Letterman actually retired from it. And so Letterman just really loves this band, man. You can tell when you watch the performances. I watched a video that showed like their first performance in 95, followed by their final performance in 2015. And I can't say their harmonies got so much better. And actually in age, they sound great during the chorus.
Well, also could be some tracks playing some duties there as well.
Oh, that could be, because the 95 definitely didn't, because you could see Mark come up to the mic and hear him.
That would not have been a thing. Yeah,
you can specifically hear his harmony. So you might be right with that one. But they sounded great. But
and that's not and using tracks is, people get scared away by that. That's not a bad thing at all. It's just it's another piece of technology you can bring to the stage. It's like saying, I don't use the internet. I know all the shit from reading books. It's like, well, you could also use the internet. It's way easier.
You could just maximize your resources.
Yeah, you have access to a lot more stuff to make. In my opinion, it's whatever makes the best show. So
I feel that.
If that's no tracks, do that. If that's tracks, do that. If that's drums, if that's not having a bass player like Hardy didn't, do that. If that's, whatever, literally whatever, just make it the best show you can make it with what you have and the vision you have in your head.
Yeah. So right after, or shortly after this performance, Darius announced that they were actually working on writing some new material.
Nice.
And the band wouldn't really be heard from until late 2018 when they announced they were going to be touring with Bare Naked Ladies in 2019 to commemorate their 25th anniversary of their Cracked Rear View album. And
that's awesome.
So that tour began May 30th of 2019 and ended in September in their hometown of Columbia, South Carolina. And they actually signed a record deal with UMG Nashville during this and hit the studio to release their sixth studio album, Imperfect Circle. The album would be released November 1st, 2019. And the album peaked at number 26 on the Billboard 200. And this was their first release as country rock. So they actually charted number 3 on the Billboard Top Country Albums, which was a first for them.
Interesting.
None of the singles charted successfully, and because it's modern day music, their album sales were like 15, 20,000. You know, stuff doesn't sell the same.
Yeah, sure. We're firmly in the streaming era at that point.
Yeah, for sure. So none of the singles, like I said, charted, other than not one that's charted, but one that it's notable is they did a cover of one of my favorite REM songs, Losing My Religion, which is one of their favorite bands of all time. So really awesome to see they finally got an REM cover out there. And that basically catches up today, which they did just release a cover for the song For What It's Worth by Buffalo Springfield this year, 2024. So the band is definitely still hitting the studio and probably writing some stuff. So I don't think it's going to be the last we hear from them. And I think Darius's recent album came out 2023. So they're still making music out there. And now it is time to rate them.
Yep. If you've been with us for a while, you know we do our ratings out of 6 categories, which we then average to come up with a overall rating. Those categories are creativity in the space. So what genre are they in? How creative are they within that genre? Evolution. How creative are they compared to, their last album to their first album? Replayability. That one's pretty obvious. Cultural impact. Also pretty obvious. Emotional connection and nostalgia factor. Those last two are a little more personal. So why don't we start off with creativity in the space? I'm interested to see what these ratings will be.
Yeah, so it's going to be
this
a little
is one where I really
place.
don't know what it's going to be. Yeah.
So for creativity within the space, I'm going to put a 4 because at the time, grunge was like the number one thing and their style of music was just nowhere to be found during that time. So they were pretty creative.
With you on that. I'll match you on that.
They were pretty creative within their space at the time. Being able to fight against grunge was really impressive, because that was just
and win too. Evolution's next. I'm gonna give them a 2, I think, on Evolution, just because they have their sound and they kind of stuck with their sound, and it's not a bad sound at all. That's not what Evolution is about. It's just about, did you evolve? Yeah,
I'm right there with you on a 2. They obviously it's weird because their best album was their first. And they did end up, if you include Darius going on his country, solo arc, that would be good Evolution, but that's a completely separate entity, in my opinion. So they will, for them as a band, Hootie, I'm giving them a 2 out of 5 as well.
Then we have replayability. What are you thinking here? I know what I'm thinking.
For me, I'm right there at like a 3 out of 5. There's some songs that I just love to go back and listen to, but as a whole, that list is probably less than 10 songs. And even then it's probably not, I'm not probably always putting on Hootie. It's great driving music, windows down, like you said. There's definitely the time and place for Hootie and the Blowfish. I'm not sure if it's all the time for me though.
I'm with you there. I'm going to put a 4 out of replayability just because, it is about 10 songs. You're right. But those 10 songs always hit when you play them. And like I said, we play some of I'm going to play one of them tonight at an acoustic gig, and everybody always sings it. So it's up there. So I'm going to give them a 4 for that. Cultural impact.
This is a hard one because in the grand, the whole scope of their career, it's probably pretty low. But within the years of their debut album, it's super high. Like they just blew up and were everywhere out of nowhere. So it's really hard to give them I'll probably sit with a 3 out of 5 for this one.
I was going to give him a 4 just because being, double diamond, that's rare. Like double diamond's rare. Being on top 10 lists is rare. Grammys, all this stuff. So
I think I'm going to bump up with impact.
You. It was just very small.
I'm going to bump up to 4 just because, cultural impact. They put South Carolina on the map for music. We don't really have a whole lot coming out of there for music, so the cultural impact around here is massive locally. So
very true. Very true.
I think you convinced me to go to 4.
Emotional connection.
Dude, I think this one might get one of the higher scores that I've ever given for emotional connection. I'm at like a 3 or a 4 right now.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too.
It's hard to really put. I'll put a 3 if you want to go 4.
That's what I was going to go. I was going to go 3 as well. But for nostalgia factor, that's a firm 5 for me.
That's a 5 for me as well. Just,
I think this really may be one of the only 5 nostalgia factors we've had yet.
Right. I think I've had 1 or 2, but yeah, nostalgia and the emotional connection are usually our lower scores. They did pretty well in that category, in my opinion. So I think you'll have a slightly higher score, just barely, because you have a 4 out of 5 on one of them.
Yeah. So let's do some math here. So I had a 4.
I don't know how to do math. I went to the University of South Carolina.
There you go. I got a 3 point, if we're rounding up, 7. Ashton ended up with a 3.5.
3.5? Nice.
3.5.
Good score for Hootie. Very appropriate.
Yeah, that feels right. I think we did good with that one.
Yeah, I feel really solid about those ratings.
Yeah. So all in all, great episode, great band. I wanted to remind you guys as we get to the end here, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening to this. If it's YouTube, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, all that good stuff. Wherever you're listening to the podcast, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, if you could hit us with one of those reviews, we'd appreciate that. And please consider joining our Patreon. $5 a month really helps us keep the show going, keep it as high quality as we can. And you get a lot of cool perks there as well. So with that, that'll do it for us today. We got a lot of cool new episodes we're working on for you over the next weeks and years. And I'm excited. Can't wait.